Okay, so the Home Hub, first of all, the GUI pops up a dialog to ask the user's name. Okay, and this is a new bit of code. It just uses this TK into module called simple dialog, and we can ask the user what their name is, and they can type something in. And then after that, the only input thing for this is a text field. So remember, this Home Hub is supposed to be representing one of those devices you have at home. You may have at home. I haven't got one, but you may have one at home where you tell it, you give it commands, and it controls things in your household, like the lights and like the the heating and that kind of thing. So what we're imagining is that this Home Hub really would have a speech recognition module attached to it, and that you'd talk into it, and it would recognize what you're saying, and then transmit that into commands. We haven't got a speech module. That's a bit advanced for the course, so all we've got is somewhere to type the commands in instead. Okay, I think it's probably best if I actually run this and show you it. So there it is. Again, we're going to run the controller, Control-Shift F10. Notice all these other classes, I think, are more or less the same, but there are some slight extra bits of code to reflect the fact it's part of a GUI. Okay, so the controller, Control-Shift F10. First, it should ask me for first it initializes all the devices. Then it asks me for my name. So that's what that simple dialog looks like. And then it pops up this Home Hub. And that's my only text, that's my only input place. So you can see I can type in a command there. And then it's got some radio buttons showing the state of all the devices, which are all off. And then some sliders showing the settings for some of those devices where I can change them. So let me just demonstrate that before we look into the code. So if I take the what should we do? Heating on. Watch the GUI. When I hit return, it switches the radio button to say on. If I say heating up, you should see the slider move up, down, heating down. Slider moves up and down. So it's reflecting what the user is giving it as a command. Okay. So that's what it looks like. How do we do that in code? There's a little bit of trickery there. This just forces the focus onto the main window. This is the only reason I've got this. I'm just going to mention this briefly. The only reason I've got this here is because if I use the simple dialog to ask the user for their name, so this is a pop-up just before the GUI runs. If I use that, then the actual Home Hub, the thing that I want to use, doesn't have the focus on it. So it sort of disappears behind the window, which isn't very good. So this bit of trickery will just tells it to put the focus on the main GUI once the simple dialog has disappeared. Okay, so here's the input text field. So we've got this entry. So the entry widget that we can then bind to the respond button. And this line here binds the text field to the return button. So when I hit enter or return on the keyboard, okay, so I'm hitting enter or I'm hitting return here. There's no buttons, if you notice, there's no button saying click me or anything. All I'm doing to register something's happening is I'm hitting the return button there. And that's what this line of code does here. It just binds the return button or the enter button to that method, the respond method, which responds by deciding what to do with the GUI. Okay, that's the basic GUI code. Other than all this, or the basic interactive bit of the GUI code, the rest of it is all these widgets that are describing all the devices. So there's the loop that controls the loop that controls these widgets or creates these widgets. You can imagine that because we've got a load of devices, I don't want to do I don't want to create a piece of code for each device. What I want to do instead is have a loop that loops through the list of devices. Okay, it adds a label with a device name. Okay, like ceiling lights, floor lamp. Puts it in the grid. It then has on and off buttons for every device can be switched on or off. Right, so that's where these buttons are. So we create a couple of buttons for each of those, but those are disabled. I'll just highlight bits of this code. I don't want to go into too much detail here because it's not really that important. But they're disabled, so the user can't switch things on and off. That was a design decision. It just makes things. It just kind of reflects what we're doing with this Home Hub, where if you think about what you would have in your house, you wouldn't normally have a load of buttons on it to switch things on and off. You would normally talk to it, and so we're trying to reflect that here by talking to it through this text field and not by switching buttons on and off. Okay, so they're disabled. What else have we got here? We've got sliders if the device has a setting. So if we're able to set something like the spotlight, we can change the brightness, and the music player, we can change the volume, and the heating, we can change the temperature using the setting. So if the device has a setting, then we've got a scale, which is this kind of slider. They're horizontal, and then we put them in the grid next to the. I'm not sure what's going on there. Put them in the grid next to the radio buttons. And finally, got that here, we tell the device about its widgets. Now, we have to do that because the device has to know about its widgets so that it can tell a widget what state it's in. So when I switch the ceiling light on, I tell the ceiling light it's switched on. The ceiling light then tells the widget what the state of the ceiling light is. Okay, so that we need to have an extra bit of code to set the widgets in the device. And if there's a radio buttons and a slider, then I've got a method called set widgets. And if there's just a radio button, then I've got a method called set widget. Okay, so let's have a look at those. So here's the light class. So these are kind of similar in all of the classes, these set widgets, depending on whether there's a setting or not. So in the light class, that's these three items at the top: the ceiling light, the floor lamp, the table lamp. They only have a radio button. Okay, and so they don't have a slider. So we have a set widget method where we pass in the radio button, and then if the when the device is set, so when the user switches it on or switches off, so I'm looking at this bit of code here. When the device is set, so the user switches it on, that calls the status, and the status then updates the radio button. So that's what that yellow line of code is. Okay, so all we got to do is register the radio button with the light and use the when the status is updated, we also update the status of the radio button, provided it exists. So that's why there's if it's not none. Okay, that's also reflected in the other classes, the spotlight and the music player and the heating, but they have slight differences in that they have a radio button and a slider to control, and they get registered with the device here. And then when the setting is changed, the class, the object will then change the slider. Okay, so if the slider exists, it might not. And then finally, the respond function is the bit of code, obviously, that responds when the user types in a command. Okay, and when we hit return, we're using this respond button, and this is almost identical to the main loop in previous versions, except that the input now comes from the text field. So the command comes from the text field, and it's not typed in by the user. So if we go to the code, there's the controller, there's the respond button. It gets the command from the text field, and then all of this code down here, all of this stuff where it decides what to do based on what the user's typed into as a command, is exactly the same as the previous example. So there's nothing new there. Okay, it just looks at the command and sees if it's, it tries to work out which device is being chosen, which device is chosen by the user, and whether the user is saying on or off or up or down. Okay, and as I say, the rest of it is exactly the same. So that's how we can do the Home Hub. It's not particularly interactive. Most of the interaction just comes from the user typing in commands in the text field rather than in the console. But now at least we've got a graphical representation of what the state of all the devices are. And obviously, I say obviously, maybe it's not obvious. If I add extra devices, then the GUI will get updated without me having to do anything. It just to create those. Where is it? There it is. To create that that set of rows with radio buttons and sliders, it just loops through the list of devices. So if I put extra devices in that list, and that list comes from here, if I add extra devices in there, they will then get reflected in in the GUI without me having to do anything more. Okay, I think that's a good point to stop that video, and then we'll finish off with a pizza example.